And welcome to another edition of the Qué Pasó podcast. I'm Ernest.
And I'm Eduardo.
Unfortunately, Ozzy could not be with us right now. He may be back depending on whether or not he manages to return from his helicopter flight. Um, Being Chilean, they have a certain affinity for those kinds of aircraft. But how's everything going?
Everything's okay. Here's well, they there. I know there has been a lot of movement in the political arena this last week, but today we want to talk about something else.
Yeah, we try to spice it up a little bit. So we're going to be discussing today a particularly devastating conflict, which goes by many names, but the one that sounds the best is the War of the Triple Alliance, or if you want to just call it plainly, the Paraguayan War.
Yeah, and in Paraguay it's called La Guerra Grande.
Well, and it certainly was because it killed 70% of their male population.
Yeah, and well, but if you only count the men in not the whole masculine population, they were at the end only 28,000 men left in Paraguay.
You hear that, incels? You missed out. that that was mean, but get it. Yeah,
Yeah,
but no, it was interesting because even though Paraguay technically started this war, it's actually Uruguay's fault. Um, and they seem to be trendsetters, devastating wars, presidents who drive Volkswagen Beetles and live on a farm selling chrysanthemums and weed. So all bad things seem to get traced to Uruguay. Um, but I mean, it was an interesting battle, interesting war, and I mean, it was a relatively long war too. I mean, it was 6 years long, and it reduced the Paraguayan population to 221,000 from just a little over 500,000. Um, and it involved, the powers of the Americas at the time, which was Brazil and Argentina. Um, and of course, everything that happens in Latin America generally happens because of something involving Blancos, which was the party that was in charge of Uruguay at the time. I believe it was around 1864, 1865.
1864 when
Yeah.
it started.
And well, the war started in 64, but there was a precursor to it in the Uruguayan War. And it was because Argentina and Brazil were supporting the Colorado party under what was his name? Venancio Flores. Um, and Uruguay was supporting Bernardo Bero from the Blanco party.
Yeah.
And so after that, though, Venancio Flores launched, what was it? Forgive me my Spanish, the Cruzador Libertad, the Liberating Crusade.
Yep.
And uh, Cruzada Libertadora, that's what it was. And that actually got Paraguay rather nervous because, I mean, they were on very good terms with Bernardo Bero's party and government. And of course, as you know, Paraguay is landlocked. So it needed to have access via the river. And of course, the river is the Parana River.
Yeah.
I think I've
One of
said that right.
yeah one of the main waterways of South America, It's the mouth of the river. It's what Uruguayans and Argentinians call the River Plate, Rio de la Plata. You may remember that from World War II, where a German ship and a British ship
At a battle, yes.
there was a battle, way too far from home.
And it was, and also, and for those who like football, it's also the name of is it the Argentinian team or Uruguayan? River Plate.
River Plate is Argentinian from Buenos Aires.
We don't hold that against them.
I mean, seriously, you have to. I think Paraguay screwed way too deep. If you consider that if they brought Argentina and Brazil together for united against them, normally you don't get that anywhere, or in any situation.
No, I mean it's very unique, especially since the traditional animosity between Portugal and Spain, and just between Brazilians and everyone else. Anyway, Brazilians generally are kind of standoffish in South America. Well, Argentinians aren't much better, but that's the German in them. But it was interesting because and it was a gamble that Presidente Solano Lopez lost. He really, I don't think he anticipated that it would go this way. And his main mistake was that when Argentina told him, no, you can't march your 20,000 strong army through our territory, you really shouldn't invade another country just because they say no. That's one thing the feminists have taught us is consent culture. You should get consent before you just go rampaging around on somebody's grass, because they're probably going to kick your ass. And in all seriousness, that's what they did. It's interesting to see the rapid advance of the Paraguayan forces, because Solano Lopez, for all his faults, he made their army one of the most feared in South America.
Well, it was feared because it was the biggest army in South America,
and it was well trained. But the thing was, it just didn't have any weapons.
I wouldn't say it was well trained, honestly. It was a situation that reminds me of Saddam Hussein and Iraq in the first Gulf War. If you remember, by that time, Iraq had an army. I think the fourth largest army in the world, and
they did, yep.
And when and suddenly America came, and they made a short work of them in a matter of months. The thing here is that it was so big that they could and inflict some. They could. The Brazilian army and the Argentinian army weren't either what you would say paragons of military virtue. No, they. I don't. Latin American armies have never been, recognized for having a good quality.
Yes, that is quite true. The other thing was, is that the Paraguayans they were a bit too confident in their own defense, because they had the fortress of Humaita. Or Humaita? Is it Humaita?
Humaita. I have it here. If you, where is this?
It's a truly fascinating fortress.
Humaita.
Humaita. It's a truly fascinating fort. It was known as the Gibraltar of South America. But the thing is that Solano Lopez was too confident in its defense because, I mean, it. One thing about these older fortresses, and I mean, it was designed by, I should say, British engineers, and it was very well developed for its time. But the thing was that it was also poorly maintained. Um, it didn't. The guns were old. Some of them weren't even working. They needed replacements. They needed upgrading. They were ancient, according to certain records. Um, and then they even had like a Byzantine style like boon, like a chain boon across the mouth of the river. Uh, and they they managed to get through it. And when they battered the fortress, it just crumbled. Because I'm just trying to find here. I had a note here about the weaponry, and it's quite interesting because the guns were just ancient. Like one of them had the viceroyalty of River Plate on them.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing. The the weapons from that war were like really outdated weapons, and I mean, uh, you may say that there weren't weapons from like really different from the when these countries got their independence. Yes, I mean still using flintlocks. How you call these rifles that are charged?
Muskets.
Yeah, muzzle loaded muskets. Yeah,
Yeah.
and here we call it rifles de avancarga. So these they were still using muskets, and I mean there were really few armies that they have a generalized use of breech-loaded rifles by that time. If you remember from the Austrian Prussian War, whereas the first time that, but it was by this time a little, yeah, by the time of this war, it was the first war in which an army used breech-loaded rifles en masse, and they made a total difference.
Yeah, the mini rifle.
Yeah.
And that they were devastating. They really were. And I mean, but these guys were still, while the West was using, mini rifles and things like that, and needle guns like the Austrians, because the Prussians had needle guns, and
Yeah.
the French had the mini balls.
And well, I mean, there's this other war really close to this one, in which breech-loaded rifles were used too. I'm talking about the Pacific War that we will cover in another episode. In which I don't remember if it was the Peruvians or the Chileans
It was the Chilean
that had that used the British rifle, the Martini Henry.
Yeah, it was definitely the Chileans. The Peruvians did not have the Martini Henry in the Pacific War. I'm actually waiting on a book about the war so I can actually give a better description of it, because all my information comes from Peru on that one, and it's all propaganda.
Yeah,
it's essentially like North Korea, where they have Kim Jong-un riding a dinosaur into battle against America. So, yeah.
If you remember, well, that's something important that an important matter you just touched. And here, most of what we know of Francisco Solano Lopez was that it is come from war propaganda from Brazil Argentina. So there are a lot of stories around him that are, you know, um, blatant lies, but there are also, I mean, I don't think they needed to, you know, came up with so many lies, since he was, the kind of person he was. His father, Carlos Antonio Lopez, used to be, before Francisco, the dictator of Paraguay. Well, the official title, Presidente de la República del Paraguay.
Well, he was also before that. He was the consul because they had this. They for some weird reason based themselves on the Roman Republic.
Yeah,
And he was first consul, if I am not mistaken.
yeah, consul, and there was another time. I think that he governed along another two guys, and that were called the triumvirates.
I think they were, but the funny thing is he tried to go to war with his own uncle, who was president at the time. He was Jose Gaspar Rodriguez de Francia, and he ran away, but he was in consul with Mariano Roque Alonso.
Yeah,
And then he exiled him and just became El Supremo, pretty much.
yeah, in another thing that this guy Francisco Solano Lopez, I mean, his father knew what kind of person he was, since one of the things he did in his, in his early adulthood, was being sent to Europe to buy a fleet with his friends and a lot of money, and almost all that money was spent in parties, alcohol, women.
Yep.
And yes, he came back with a fleet, and I don't think a very good fleet. And another,
but it's South America. How many South American dictators usually come back with nice stuff? Except apparently the funny thing is that Solano Lopez seems a bit insane because it was in the 1850s. He made his soldiers dress like the Grand Army of Napoleon.
yes.
So, and that style was 40 years out of date.
Yeah, if you see the how the soldiers at the time of the most important armies dressed. I mean, look at the American and Confederate armies, or the armies in Europe, like Prussia, Denmark, France, uh, or Austria. Hell, even the Mexican army. You remember these boots over the white pants and big hat.
Yep.
The big hats were. I think the end of the big hats were Waterloo.
Yeah, like if you watch, you ever seen the show called Sharps Rifles?
Sharps. I've heard of it.
You should watch it. You'll see. I mean that's probably when they last used these things, but he seems to have admired all the wrong things
Of Napoleon.
Yes, because he even apparently ordered an exact replica of his crown, but they never found it. So it's probably stored in some Brazilian's basement.
Well, another thing, yeah, you remember how Napoleon lost his Imperial Guard in Waterloo.
Yeah.
They were charging towards the British light infantry on tall grass, and the big hats gave them away. So, well, Waterloo.
But I mean, and the funny, it is, and we can definitely touch on some Napoleonic conflicts in the future because they are interesting. I find though too that there was one battle. I think it was the Battle of Yate um, during the Paraguayan War, where the Paraguayan cavalry essentially charged heavy guns. And rule number one: don't charge at the things that shoot grape shot.
Yeah.
And I mean, so it was their whole army just advanced towards the guns, and I mean, back then, even in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, you were going in tight formations. I mean, it was lines upon lines of men, because the reason is, and the reason this came about for people who don't know, muskets are not very accurate, and essentially you have to stand in a straight line and fire at each other, and even if you fire in a straight line, there's a chance you're going to miss.
Yeah, and that's another thing he copied from Napoleon. Their cuirassiers taking care of the enemy artillery in almost every battle. But this guy, another thing. Well, nothing. Somebody Solano Lopez brought from Europe was his mistress Elisa Lynch. That apparently he had a really bad reputation in the Paraguayan high society, and well, she was a prostitute back in Paris.
If you notice, though, if you know your history, in South America, the lynches tend to be rather prominent. There was one fellow during the El Guerra de Pacifica called Patricio Lynch, and he did some pretty cool shit for a Chilean, but we don't talk about that. And also the other famous Lynch, Che Guevara, because Che Guevara's second name was Lynch.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, those tricky Irishmen.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, another aside from that, Solano Lopez built a lot of things in Asunción for her mistress, like an opera house, art galleries. I mean, maybe that's one of the what you could say a good thing from his tenure as president of Paraguay, but still he was crazy. So we are giving like a lot of steps in the dark around the topic. I think people have now an idea of who was Francisco Solano Lopez, what was happening. Well, I think we should talk a little what was happening in the American continent at that time. For example, Brazil. It was the war started in 1864. By that time, the American Civil War was in their last days, and you know what happened with a lot of Confederate soldiers from the Confederate people from at the end of the war.
They left. Yeah, they immigrated
to Brazil, and I mean there are I've seen a documentary of these people there in Brazil. They have a traditional southern
yes, I have seen that. I've seen this.
All dressed in Confederate uniforms.
Well, then again, Brazil was still a slave country back then. Mm-hmm. I mean, Brazil didn't abolish slavery until the late 1800s, and that's how the empire got toppled.
Yeah. So, that's another thing. Brazil was still an empire.
And it was, and which was quite different, in comparison to the rest of South America, because I mean, they had all spent their time fighting off an empire, and the only place in South America that was still a monarchy that was independent was Brazil. And normally that would have caused a lot of friction, because I mean, republics and monarchies, especially in the mid 1800s, didn't.
Yeah. Peter?
Hmm? Sorry, water went down the wrong pipe.
Okay.
But it's interesting that Solano Lopez placed so much of his defensive hope on Homaita, and then just said, "Well, I'm going to go and invade both Brazil and Argentina at the same time because that's a wonderful idea." And at first, excuse me, he made some very good gains. He got, I believe, the province called Mato Grosso.
Yeah, he invaded the Mato Grosso. Well, what part of today's province of Mato Grosso is was part of Paraguay. I mean, Paraguay got really dismembered.
Oh no, they didn't, and they managed to get some territory back from Bolivia in the 19. I think it was the early 1900s.
In the 50s, 40s, what is known as La
the
Guerra
Chaco
del
War.
Yeah, the Chaco War. Yeah, that's another interesting war, and I hope we talk about it in another episode because
we should, and I think that we should talk about. I'll have to admit, Paraguay has had an unfortunate situation, but I think the country that has gotten the biggest short end of the stick in South America is Bolivia, because they just keep losing land.
Yeah, and well, look, that's another thing from what we call Hispanoamerica. The further you go from the shore, the less developed the lands and countries are. I mean, it was when the Spanish came here. Look where they developed the most. It was, Lima in the Pacific coast. Santiago, well, the whole Chile, the whole country of Chile, it's like a really long beach. Beach as in playa, not beach.
You've got Maracaibo in Venezuela.
Yeah, Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires, Montevideo. Well, Montevideo is more Brazilian. Well, nah, kind. Yeah, that's a complicated one.
Well, I don't know if we have any spectator from Argentina or from Uruguay, but normally you can tell a Uruguayan from an Argentinian. Don't kill me, please.
It comes down to the accent. I find I've met some Argentinians. I haven't met a Uruguayan. I've only seen them on TV when they're biting Italians.
Yeah, I know. For example, another case in point, Mexico. How the whole it was easier for the Spaniards to settle even the most remote parts of the Selva Lacandona, the Lacandona jungle in the Yucatan Peninsula and Chiapas, rather than go inland to the north. And well, yeah, they said they made settlements there like Los Angeles, Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, Albuquerque, Tucson, or San Antonio de Béjar. But still, at the end of the day, when Mexico lost those territories, they were basically vacant, aside from little one or two communities. But think of Paraguay. Paraguay is a really isolated country. I think you have heard these stories about the company of Jesus priests that went into the jungle and basically, they took whole villages of Guaraníes or other natives and they almost m- made them live in forced labor camps.
Yeah, the Jesuits were, and the Dominicans and Franciscans were not that well. Actually, Franciscans were alright, but generally the Jesuits were not the nicest people to the natives. Um,
Well, I mean, they're yeah, they were. I think the best track record of an um, monastic order, if with natives, are the Dominicans or the Benedictines. But yeah, what I mean is that countries like Bolivia, or the landlocked countries like Bolivia or Paraguay, are were not as developed as the countries all around them. Look, or think of it when you go the deeper you go into Brazil.
yeah.
Yeah, you may say that, yeah, there's uh, Manaus, deep into the Amazonian jungle. Yeah, but Manaus was developed when you know, rubber trees were discovered in the area, and it became useful. Now Manaus is another backwater town there in Brazil.
No, I mean no, and it's true, and it's the same. You know, it's like that all around the world. I mean, and I'm gonna deviate for 1 second, but I mean, you look at say like where I'm from, the capital city of Newfoundland was St. John's. When the fishing fleets of the United Kingdom, were the force because people were fishing here. There's great fishing grounds off the coast. St. John's was booming. I mean, you had merchants from all over the world, especially well, at least all over the West, setting up shop. You had the population growing in leaps and bounds, and now once the fishing has no longer become, once we've fished the waters, and we're no longer, the British no longer really need us, and all of our businesses to the west, there's really no need for the town, and I mean it's essentially it's dying, it's stagnant.
Yeah,
So I mean it's the same, but you go to places like Lima, where it's always been an important center of commerce. Lima, Guayaquil,
Mexico
uh,
City.
yeah, but
I
yeah,
mean,
that's not. No, I know what you mean. Or Veracruz, maybe.
Lima, well, Lima and Mexico City were the two main seats of the Spanish power in America.
They were. That's true. I just meant on terms of like a strategic, like on the coast.
Oh yeah,
Um, you had a lake, but then you drained it, and now you've killed all your weird Mexican skipping fish. There's some kind of weird fish that lives there. It looks like a shorter version of AMLO, but we won't talk about that this week.
el peje lagarto.
Mm. hmm But no, but like you go to somewhere like you compare Lima to Asuncion, and there is no comparison. I've never been to Asuncion, but it doesn't look like the most interesting place to visit. There's not It's not as storied a history as say Lima or Santiago or even Valparaiso. Um, there's nothing. Um, and I think that's the main problem with Paraguay is that for all their ambitions, they didn't have the people to fill it.
Yep.
Whereas I mean, it's a coastal country. Same with Argentina. I mean, they bring people in. I mean, immigrants generally when they go somewhere. I mean, I know we're a little bit off topic, but I mean, it's all interconnected. Um, this is how populations grow. Immigrants, they come somewhere, they generally stop and settle at the first place they get off. I mean, that's why New York grew in leaps and bounds in the early days of America. Well, I mean the early time of immigration, Ellis Island and all that.
Yeah.
And they'll that's why Lima is so big. That's why Lima's got 8 million people, and Assumption's got whatever the heck Assumption has. Um, they get off these places, and I mean it's convenient. Nobody wants to go up a river filled with bugs and malaria to go to some city in the middle of nowhere. Generally not, at least. I mean, it takes a special kind of person.
Yeah.
like Solano Lopez.
I
But
have uh,
yep,
yeah,
go ahead.
I have a friend from Argentina. He used to live on for a time in Asunción, and he says it was like really for the standards of an Argentinian city, it was like a really ugly place.
I mean, I'm looking at it, and it's not a very beautiful looking city. I mean, and it's not even that big. I mean, it's well, city size is around 500,000 people. I mean, your metropolitan's around 2 million, but I mean, you compare it to Mexico City or Buenos Aires, it's it's nothing. I mean,
Well, Buenos
it's
Aires,
it's a it's a barrio.
indeed, no. I mean, half a million people. It's the half of the place where I live. I live in a city of 1 million people, 1,200,000 people, something like that. And you know, the as you say, it was a Asunción wasn't a really important place for the Spaniards. Paraguay was the first country to get its independence from Spain, but I mean, I think when the Spanish lost it, they were like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, we really don't need this place full of Guarani Indians and mosquitoes. Let's just let them have it.
Yeah, they couldn't care less about them. But for example, places that they really care about, namely the
Mexico
Nueva
and Peru.
Granada, Peru, Mexico, Nueva Granada, that later became La Gran Colombia, or and Rio de la Plata.
That's one we really got to do a stream on. Gran Colombia. That's a fascinating rise and fall of a nation.
Yeah, and another stream about the independence process in Latin America. That would be great.
Culminating in, of course, the Battle of Ayacucho, which has a very, very interesting march named after it.
Yeah.
Um, but and of course, Simon Bolivar, who was once the liberator of South America and is now Hugo Chavez's buddy in
Yeah,
every picture.
and I hate him.
Yeah, now everyone hates Bolivar, and
Ah,
apparently he also had syphilis. So
good. I mean,
Bolivar had it, not Chavez. Well, but
um, no, I mean, good for Bolivar to have syphilis. I mean, he was really, he really supported the people that was against His Majesty Agustin de Iturbide. So
true, but he got around. I mean, when you travel a lot, you meet new people. Some of them happen to be women. It's the 1800s.
yeah,
Well, I should say love, but stuff happens, and then you die of syphilis. That's generally the main cause of death in the world at the time, was either syphilis or tuberculosis. um, you either died of either one.
yeah.
And I mean, you go from the liberator of South America to the face on toilet paper. I mean, or I'm sorry, the Boulevard of Sobrano. But anyway, we're a bit too off topic, and of course, our time is unfortunately rather limited. I think though it is interesting to see like how this war progressed. And Solano Lopez did take the initiative. I mean, taking Mato Grosso.
Yeah, the war started when with the naval encounters on the mouth of the Paraná River, and was followed by the campaign of Mato Grosso, which was a large scale offensive from Paraguay into Brazilian territory. And I
Yes.
mean,
Go ahead.
Yeah, the Mato Grosso, as you may know, is covered. It's a big jungle. So imagine, the biggest country in South America, a jungle province, and you want to and you want to invade that country through the jungle. I mean, I wouldn't even use any resources and just let the jungle speed them back into Paraguay, which I think the Brazilians didn't really committed a lot of forces to.
3,000.
Yeah,
Because I mean, you think about a jungle. Um, Malaria is the main one. That's gonna go through. You're gonna get dysentery. Um, you're gonna get cholera. Because I mean, you're gonna be drinking brackish water. I mean, there's rivers there, but I mean, the rivers, the water quality in a jungle is not that good. You've got animals. You've got the heat. Um, the mosquitoes, the other diseases besides yellow fever. You've got yellow fever. You've got everything under the sun. And I mean, back then they didn't have malaria medication, so you got malaria, you went raving mad, and then you died. Um, that's what killed Lord Carnarvon in Egypt. He ended up getting they say it was a mosquito bite, but he probably had malaria. But either way, I mean that devastates soldiers. I mean, you've got to spend resources taking care of these soldiers because I mean they're sick, they're dying. You've got to devote resources to burying them, which I mean slows down your advance. Um, then
and
you've got hostile Indians.
yeah, hostile Indians, and well, the capital by that time of Brazil was Brasilia didn't exist by the time. It was Sao Paulo,
Yep.
and the distance between Sao Paulo and Asunción is 1,321 kilometers.
Ooh.
True, yeah. And Solano Lopez was intending their troops cover that distance through the jungle. I mean, it says it's 272 hours walking from Asunción to Sao Paulo.
There's no way. I mean, it's kind of crazy to wonder, what was this man's thought process? I mean, because we're both rational, intelligent people, and I mean, I think that's nuts. I
Yeah,
mean, and there's only 7,000 soldiers. That's not a big army. I mean, that's really it's essentially a division.
yeah,
Um,
and you get to an elevation of 1934 meters over the sea level. I mean, I don't think it's a lot of height, but yeah, you may know what happened to the Argentinian players when they go to play to Bolivia. They always screw up playing football against Bolivia
in La
um,
Paz.
in La Paz. Yeah,
Yeah, because I mean, it is the altitude sickness. You get dizzy, you get unsteady, you get sick. I've been like that because I've been to some rather high because Peru has some rather high up places,
yeah.
like Cusco. It takes a lot of getting used to. And I don't think they had coca to chew on back then. So well, or to snort. that that would have got them moving pretty quick. They would have been in Sao Paulo by like Tuesday.
Yeah,
Um,
and they well, but this 272 hours is a walk. What a single person could do in modern highway. Well, they're modern roads. Well, modern roads for the standard of that time. I mean, what I don't think there was, a road that went from Sao Paulo to Asunción. I think they had to take machetes to chop uh, weed. Well, not weed. To chop through the jungle.
oh yeah, no, they really had to, and I mean you're fighting at the same time, and I mean you're also wearing. I mean, you look at the clothing, wool, because they didn't have like loot like yoga pants and sweats.
Hmm.
They had wool clothing, and that stuff is heavy. It's hot.
and it can retain a lot of water.
Yes, it can. So I mean, it's you're not only having a hard time going through this jungle as it is, walking through swamps and getting wet and getting you know eaten alive by bugs. You're also in itchy woolen pants. So I I don't know how you could. I mean, even fight because you'd have to spend 5 minutes, adjusting yourself because of the heat. Um, and just itchy and wet and damp and oh my god, I mean it was torture. But they ended up getting slaughtered because I mean while initially they took the advance,
Yeah,
um, they couldn't maintain it.
yeah, and
And
the Brazilians just how you call it, defended it in depth. Yeah, they let them came, and they knew that it wasn't gonna they were gonna last long.
well, I mean the part of the Paraguayan expeditionary force got held off by like 17 Brazilians in a fort. Um, it was intense. I mean, they never even advanced to Guiaba. They got like as far I think as Melgaco, or I can't pronounce Portuguese, but they got as far as that or towards Coromba,
Yeah,
and then they just said, yeah, let's go home. This is not fun. This is damp and wet, and we don't like it. So they turned around and went home. But I mean, really though, it was a big failure, and I mean, he could have taken those nearly 8,000 men and used them, towards Argentina. He could have just fortified against Brazil, because I mean, the jungle. You have the advantage of terrain. You have jungle, and Paraguay is it's a rather subtropical country.
yeah.
So I mean, you're surrounded by swamps and marsh and bogs and God knows what else. And I was watching actually, ironically, Kings and Generals, that channel on YouTube. I don't know if you've ever seen them.
And no, I haven't.
They're really good. They actually did a video on one of the main battles of the Paraguayan War. Let me see. It was the Battle of Yete, I think. I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, it was the Battle of Yete in '65. Um, and it was a slaughter because I mean there was only about 83 killed on the Allied side, and the Paraguayans lost 1,700,
No,
and then the other 1,200 were captured. Like the guys that were left over just gave up.
that's another thing. I mean, it was a really difficult war for to win for Paraguay. If you only take a look at the number of population of each side, 500,000 Paraguayan citizens at that time against three nations with a combined population of 11 million.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they could afford to just throw waves, wave after wave of people against Paraguay, and eventually they would win the war. And I mean, Solano Lopez uh, was high in the mountains with his last 200 men running from the Brazilians.
yeah, that was at Sirocora, I
Yeah,
think, when he was finished off by the Duke of I can't pronounce Brazilian or Portuguese. Cajas, I think it is.
Caixas. Yeah.
Cajas, yeah. And it was a slaughter because I mean Solano Lopez as was incredibly stupid. Um, and he ended up getting killed. I believe it was in that battle. Um,
Well, after the battle.
well, he went. Well, he got stabbed, and then he was mortally wounded, and he was then shot. And then actually, sad part of that is that Solano Lopez's 15-year-old son also was shot. Um, because they wanted him to surrender, and he, for some reason, Lopez was insane and made his son a colonel. And, you know, the Brazilians said, hey, listen, Juan Francisco, por favor, surrender. And he goes, un coronel paraguayo nunca se rinde. And then they shot him. Because Brazilians. This was before twerking was invented in Brazil, so instead of, yeah.
But I mean, what would happen if they let him live?
They would have used him as a rallying tool. You know, they would have he would have been a symbol of the resistance, I guess, because you know their father, you know, the president of Paraguay, you know, made the ultimate sacrifice por la patria. And as we both know, Latinos are ridiculously patriotic. And I mean, they would have fought probably to the last man if you know this boy colonel had come out and managed to survive. Um, it it was a hard battle, and I mean, it was a hard war, really. And actually, the funny thing is that in the battle, the last battle of the Paraguayan War, no Brazilians got killed.
Yeah, I
Not
think that says well that it's a how you say a that bear witness to the morale of the Paraguayan army.
well, yeah, because I mean, they ended up killing 200 of the Paraguayan soldiers, and then captured the rest, like the 247 of them that were left. Um, it I don't really understand. I mean, why he didn't just give up? Because I mean, the game was over, and I mean, I guess he knew that he was going to be. You know, he didn't want to watch his nation get dismembered because that's how it happened back then. It wasn't like now where they just say, "Well, congratulations, you lost the war. Here's the second best medal. Um, pay us some money, and we'll send the UN in." It was, you've lost. You're either going to pay us a king's ransom, or we're going to take your territory. So maybe he figured that his death could be used as a rallying cry for the other 200,000 Paraguayans that were left. But I mean, he was insane, and he essentially was a precursor to Chavez. I mean, in his own search for glory, he almost destroyed his country.
Yeah, it's an ambivalent, really ambivalent figure right now in Paraguay because some people said no, he was a hero, a patriot, and all, and other people say he was a madman. He almost destroyed the country.
Well, yeah, in really he did. And I mean, I was talking to some Brazilians that I know prior to doing the stream, and you see, they have a very different opinion on the war. Um, he tries to tell me that in Brazil, they're kind of given like the guilt trip, as it were. It's essentially that big bad Brazil started the war and then picked on poor little Paraguay. Because they're the bigger guys or the bigger nation. they have to take responsibility.
Yeah, and I don't.
It's
I
not
don't.
true.
Yeah. For what I know, Brazil didn't start the war.
No, I mean it was essentially Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina, and Brazil had just gotten dragged into it because they had signed, of course, the alliance, the Triple Alliance. But I mean it's such a complicated war that I mean I really don't think we could do this in one of our standard episodes. Um, because I mean just the precursors, the as I guess the what would Latin be casus belli, you know, for this war is ridiculous. Essentially, this whole thing started to prop up the Partido de Blancos in Uruguay. That's it.
Yeah, and well,
Well, that and the rapid militarization of Paraguayan society. But I mean, I can understand that. I mean, no country, I mean, be it Brazil or Argentina, wants to have a neighbor that can tip the equilibrium,
hmm
and because I mean Paraguay, I mean, despite the fact that I mean it's essentially not a very nice country. I mean, I'm sure Paraguay. I don't know any Paraguayans. I'm sure they're wonderful people. It's just that their country is not. Assumption is not on my list of places to visit anytime soon.
yeah,
Um,
neither do I
we
want
can.
to.
Yeah, I
Just,
mean.
just to let you know, the walk from that I was telling you about from Asunción to Sao Paulo, it's
Mhm.
about the same distance from Mexico City to the border with the United States.
Damn, that's actually almost. Well, it's here. It's about the distance from my town to the capital is about 12 hours by driving. It's about 900 kilometers.
Well, is there some kind of way to get out of your island in car?
Um, no. Well, you can take a boat.
Like a ferry?
Yeah, you take a ferry. They may be building a tunnel across the strait soon. That'll take you between. I think it's going to be Saint Anthony. It's called, like, that's the name of the town. Essentially in Spanish, San Antonio, to Labrador, which is the continent-based part of the province. It's come up by some guy named Danny Dumarisk. He wants to build this giant tunnel. Well, he wants the government to build it because he doesn't have the money. So where France has the channel, we will have what's called the Dunnel.
The tunnel.
That I copyright that name, by the way. That's I created that because his name is Danny Dumarisk, so we're just calling it the Dunnel. Um, we need all the marketing we can get. We're poor. We're like the Paraguay of Canada, except we only had one stupid war, and that was World War One, where we killed like most of our young merchant class and fighting age men in one battle. You ever heard of a battle called Beaumont Hamel?
Nope.
You should, because it was so bad that a British officer quoted, he's like, that was a splendid display of bravery by the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Too bad dead men can't advance any further. It essentially, I mean, Newfoundland's population was like 250,000, not even, in World War One, and we sent all of our our best young people into this war. All we could muster was a regiment, like I think 1,800 people, and at the end of it, only like actually I gotta figure that I think it's only a couple hundred answered roll call the next day because they all got slaughtered, which essentially is related to the Paraguayan War, because we had because I mean, as someone who is growing up hearing about this loss every year, we know about it. I'm just gonna have to look here to see the numbers because I mean it is kind of similar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where we lost essentially the flower of our male population. Let me see. First 500, Gallipoli, the Somme.
Well, you know what happened after Gallipoli. They they basically gave an ultimatum to the Australia and New Zealand gave an ultimatum of England with that we're getting our independence after this, either you want it or not.
Well, for us here's what it was. 700 and we had a casualty rate of 90%. So I mean, in one battle they sent 780 men over, and 68 came back for roll call the next day. So we white, and that's a special episode we're gonna have to do on Canada Day, because that actually is a really important event for us. Um, because we only had a population of 240,000 people, and we ended up creating our quote unquote army, which was one regiment, and we didn't even have enough clothing to supply them, so we gave them like blue stockings, and that's why they were called the blue patties. But but either way, I mean it set us back economically because we lost a lot of good men, merchants, the educated class forming, the officer caste, and then your fishermen, your lumberjack, your younger, strong and healthy men got wiped out in one fight. So I mean, it threw many merchant households in turmoil because all their kids were dead. They had no one to carry on the businesses, so the parents, sold off. Um, it stagnated the politics because we weren't bringing up new members of government. There was no more ruling class, like or at least there was no second generation of it because it was all dead.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of start from scratch again, and that's what the Paraguayans had to do after the Battle of Cerro. They had to do what we did 100 years later, rebuild, and we didn't. We
Well,
we fucked up.
coming back to the Mato Grosso campaign.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah. I was there's a and there's an interesting question here. The Paraguayan advance wasn't in the direction of Sao Paulo. Was they went straight towards Rio Grande do Sul,
Yep.
and one of the objectives was Cuiabá, the capital of Mato Grosso, uh, of the Mato Grosso
Of the province.
province. Yeah. So, and it's really far north, and really not only far north, way deep into the jungle, and they sent less than 8,000 men. Of course, hardly they were, they were going to get anything out of it.
There wasn't much thought process behind it. I mean, it was. I mean, you got to think about certain things in war, and I do enjoy the study of it. It comes down to how good your logistics are,
Yeah.
and I don't think the Paraguayans had very good logistics, and Brazilians didn't either because the one who commanded the defense of Mato Grosso died of cholera during the battles. So that kind of threw them back a little bit, which allowed the Paraguayans to advance. But the thing is, there's certain rules, and one of the main rules is you don't overstretch your supply line. And I mean, you're going into a jungle.
Yeah.
It's hard to resupply these things. I mean, you don't have roads, you don't have transportation. You can't just stick it on an ox or in an ox cart and drag it to this location. I mean, you've got to essentially either float it down the river or have it carried on your back. And when you do that, you limit the amount of food your soldiers carry. You limit their amounts of ammunition. Um, you make them tired because I mean they've got to carry a lot of this. A lot of these soldiers back then carried their supplies on their backs, especially going through campaigns like that. Because I mean you can't stick it on the carts; it's going to get bogged down in the dirt.
Yeah, and as you well as by that time we are, I don't think there was any army that could, you know, that with a logistics, well, with a supply train that could actually manage to, to trek inside the jungle, inside a jungle like this one. And it's I find it surprising that actually this offensive lasted more than
4 years.
yeah, almost 4 years.
But I mean,
And
like it was. Oh, sorry.
well, of course they have the Terena natives uh, fighting against the Paraguayans.
It was, but I mean, the interesting thing about this is that the main objective for the Mato Grosso campaign wasn't to take Guayaba. It was to actually capture the mines in Mato Grosso.
Yeah,
Which I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Mato Grosso produces a fair amount of gold, which can be used, back to fund your army. Um, so what he was trying to do, I mean, Solano was smart in that regard. He actually was rather well trained militarily, by the way. Just to kind of bring that out there, he was well educated on war. He just didn't follow through with a lot of his lessons. Rule number one: don't invade Russia. Rule number two: don't invade Brazil through the back door because you're going to get stuck in a swamp.
yeah.
Um,
And a special rule for Germany: do not fight a war in two fronts.
don't invade Poland. It never ends well.
Yeah,
But no, like I mean, I think that he is almost we can really call him Napoleon of France or Napoleon of South America because he literally invaded a much larger neighbor and got bogged down due to attrition.
yeah, and it's the first rule of war of Sun Tzu. The Brazilians, as well. I think you know this band Sabaton.
Yep.
Well, he in the they devoted an album, a complete album, to the art of war, of Sun Tzu's art of war, and they speak of some battles and like extract a lesson from the art of war there. And I think of two in this case. The first rule of war: know your enemy and know yourself.
Yep.
I think Solano Lopez failed in those two. Or he overestimated his supply train capacity in the Mato Grosso campaign, and the Brazilians simply left them to, as you say, die of attrition. They were close but still untouchable.
It was, but I mean, the other interesting thing, by the way, is that when you look at it from a strategic point, how he went about the Mato Grosso was good because he didn't just send in one just great column. He split his forces in half.
Exactly.
And each had that objective, which I mean is good in a way because I mean you achieve your goals faster by dividing the responsibility, but at the same time you leave them more vulnerable, which
Another
he did.
another lesson from Sun Tzu and the art of war here. There is no battle plan that survives an encounter with the enemy.
No, no.
And of course, another the same goes for England and France and New Zealand and Australia. There are positions that should not be contested,
Yep.
towns that must not be besieged. Uh, this the and he still went he still went on.
But you see, I think looking at it from the political side, was that when he decided to give the ultimatum to Argentina, because Argentina's refusal to obey the Paraguayan ultimatums was what triggered this.
Yeah,
So I think what it was that, but he was confident that the Brazilians and everything like that, even though they had this alliance, he figured because he had the jungle and the terrain on his side, he wouldn't have to worry about Brazil, and he wouldn't have to worry about being invaded, by any of these countries, as long as he secured the Parana River.
yeah, and well, uh, as uh, as unpredictable as he was, I think that was a really big factor of Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay being so worried about him, about Solano Lopez and Paraguay. A crazy person with the poorest country in South America, with the biggest army in South America. That's and those all are red lights.
It does, and it also is a parallel to another very very poor country with a very 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 large army,
Yeah,
North Korea.
exactly.
But North Korea isn't going to invade Brazil through a jungle, or at least they're not going to march their army through the minefields of South Korea. Not yet, not yet.
Um,
We just need to see if Kim Jong Un goes to France anytime soon and buys a crown,
yeah, and
gets an
there's
Irish girlfriend.
yeah, there's these which left I can I think the other what brought Argentina to the war was the Paraguayan campaign on the province of Corrientes. Well, no, a province in the
Yeah.
north of Argentina.
Well, he
Uh,
marched his army through there because of that was the bigger part of the campaign, because
yeah,
he put 20,000 through him.
his intentions was to how you say um, get an army his army to Uruguay, but the Argentinians to didn't want let he didn't want them to pass,
Yep, that's true.
which I think is the it's a sovereign decision of any country.
Oh, especially and you think about it, because Argentina was supporting the Partido Colorado,
Hmm.
and whereas Solano Lopez was supporting the Partido Blanco. Um,
Yes.
so of course, Argentina is not going to say, "Well, yeah, you can come through my doorway and beat up my friends." Sure, man, come on through. No, they're going to say no. They're It was just natural. I think the president of Argentina was me today at the time. Um, but he refused because he wanted the Colorados to win. And once Paraguay declared war on them, the Colorados did win. And where it would have been a double alliance, because it would have been Paraguay and Uruguay on one side, and then Brazil and Argentina on the other, if it came to be like that, they might have been a little bit better off. But instead, the Colorados won, and that's that. They ended up joining the side, and it went against Solano Lopez's expectations. He didn't plan for that. He expected, to be in Montevideo and conquer and help them win, and then he would have another ally to kind of divide up the Brazilians and the Argentinians.
Yes, and I think his main goal was to get enough Argentinian territory to link up with Uruguay and be more influence even more in the internal politics of Uruguay.
And I think that's true, but I think at the end of the day, Solano Lopez is kind of like Icarus. He tried to fly too high too close to the sun,
Yeah.
and he ended up falling into the sea, or in this case, getting stabbed in the crotch by a guy named Chico Franco or Chico Diablo, and then shot to death. So it's an interesting thing to see because he also actually did some good for all the trouble he brought. Trouble will be putting it lightly, I guess, but for everything he put Paraguay through, he also gave it railroads, which I don't know if that kind of makes up for it. It's not something you would get a Hallmark card for. Hey, I killed 70% of your male population, but you got this railroad. Happy birthday.
Yeah. Paraguay, well, and you may know, building railroads in a country like Paraguay, which is covered with mountains, jungle, and swamps, is
It's not a very good idea.
no. But it's a real progress of engineering.
It is. So, I mean, we can give him that much credit. I
Yeah.
mean, for being batshit insane, he was a visionary. He just didn't plan. He just wasn't very good at planning.
I mean, it's he no. There were also a lot of battles in the Paraná River, like for
For Humanita as
yeah,
well.
and for a lot of uh, for a country between four nations, uh, and one of them landlocked, and well, and one of them being landlocked, there were way too many naval battles.
I mean, it was. I mean, they had a large fleet of steamships,
Yeah.
which are wonderful for going through the jungle rivers. Everything else they're terrible, but I mean the thing is that once the Brazilians brought the strength of their ironclads to bear, it was game over. I mean, especially because the Paraguayans had outdated weaponry, it was just going to bounce off the armor.
Yes, and well, the ironclads have been in use for a while. For a while, then. Do you remember, like the Americans when they opened back uh, Japan to the world? They basically just parked an ironclad in front of one of their ports and gave them an ultimatum.
They did, and also, but I mean, you also had the USS Monitor, which was the first ironclad.
Yeah, and
Um,
do you remember what the Japanese did? They tried to board the ship with a lot of samurais, and then
no, you're thinking of the turtle ships from what's his name, Sun Yat Sen. Um,
I
during Noble, because they had turtle ships covered in iron plates.
yeah, I mean, I think the Japanese also tried to board this monitor ship, but and that's why the Americans bombed the port in Japan.
Yep. that could be it as well. I mean, that's something we'd have to do a bit of research on. I mean, but it's interesting to see this. I mean, but once the Brazilians brought their ironclads to bear, it was game over. Because I mean, the only thing Paraguay had was its control. Was essentially the only thing really keeping it safe, I should say, was its control of the river. And when it lost control of the river, that's it. The supplies are cut off. Um, and it doesn't have to be food; it's ammunition, potential reinforcements. Everything is cut. So
Yeah,
it was bad luck.
yeah. Another thing important to mention about the siege of Humaita
Yep.
is that after they took that, the next 50 kilometers cost the Triple Alliance 100,000 men to advance.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I mean, for a siege that lasted from uh, November 1867 to 1868, which was an approximate date when when the remnants of the Paraguayan army that invaded Mato Grosso were returning, and the Brazilians were on the counterattack from the north in Mato Grosso, and this fortress was being besieged in the south by Argentinians and Brazilians. It was
Yep.
it was a, how you say it, they were in a really compromised position by that time.
Oh yeah, but I mean, you once you get attacked on a couple of fronts, it's game over. I mean, you there's only so much you can handle. I mean, there's so much pounding. Um, and if you the only other way to fight it off is if you have a large population. I mean, you have couple million people, whereas Paraguay did not have this. They couldn't reinforce their numbers. You've got casualties. You've got people, who are, they might have survived a battle, but they've lost a limb. They've lost this or that. They can't be easily replaced, especially with a small population like that. And I mean, by the time the war ended in 1870, there was no one left. They had essentially used up all of their all of their male forces.
Yeah, there's I mean, it's many people talk about, it's the massive amount of of civilians and the casualties on the Paraguayan side, but the Paraguayans did a really did killed like more than 60,000 civilians in Argentina and Brazil, and so that's not a small number. Also,
No, I mean nowadays that'd be a war crime.
yeah,
Because I mean, and even back then, I mean, the rule was generally not to kill civilians if you could help it, unless you resisted.
yeah.
And there wasn't a bigger resistance.
And there was there in this book I told you, the
Mm-hmm.
Great Big Book of Horrible Things from Matthew White, which I recommend it a lot. It's they say that there was a shift in the way that war the in the shift in the way wars were being fought from, total war, uh, killing civilians, sacking cities, and basically, total extermination. One to the where the battlefields were outside of cities, and the lives of civilians were respected. Were respected. And but here there was I mean, as you may know, Latin Americans are really hot-headed. We are really hot-headed.
Yep.
I can imagine the Paraguayans having a lot of contempt for the civilians of their enemy of the enemy nations, and a lot of contempt of the Brazilians and Argentinians for the Paraguayans civilians. I understand. I can almost picture the situation, and it's a normally and well, I mean when the Allies finally reached Asunción, they were using uh, they were having a how you say they they made it with like 35,000 troops against 5,000 soldiers from on the Paraguayan side.
Mhm.
It was one of the it was I it was an atrocity. I mean, if anybody do something like that today,
Yep.
I think it would be a military court for anyone who dares to even think that.
But I mean, you think about it though, there was a precedent. It was William Sherman's March to the Sea.
Oh yeah,
He gutted, on his way on his way to Atlanta. Um,
yeah. Sherman's march to the sea. Yeah. You can if in Victoria 2 you can activate that option.
yes, you can. It's a terrifying option.
There's a Victoria 2 is a strategy game from Paradox Interactive. Really, I really recommend that game. It's really good.
Same here. I can't wait for Victoria 3 to come out.
Oh my god, that will be epic.
It will be, but it is getting late. We've been doing this for about an hour. Well, hour and a half, I believe. I think it went okay. I mean, we got a bit rambly off there, but I mean, for our first history stream, it went rather well. What do you think?
Yeah, it went well. And well, there's another interesting fact
Sure.
about this war, which brings us to the Paraguayan Legion. It was a military unit led by Juan Francisco de Cud and Fernando Iturburu that was formed in Argentina during the Paraguayan War and I'm reading here, and consisted mainly of Paraguayan exiles and opponents of Francisco Solano Lopez. Due to mistrust between the Allied Argentina and Brazil, the Legion never developed into a strong fighting unit, as Brazilians distrusted this unit created by Argentina. They started fighting only in March 1879, but under a Paraguayan flag. So imagine that.
It's kind of it's kind of confusing. I mean, you're supposed to shoot at the guys who are carrying the Paraguayan flag, and they're standing like literally in a line next to you.
And well, they participated in the sack of Asunción also. So you may you may think there was a real animosity between them and Solano Lopez.
Well, he did burn a lot of bridges, so I could see it happening, and I mean, at least he did better than the president of Peru during the Guerra del Pacifico, Nicolas de Berriola, who, after losing, I'm not even going to get into it because that would spoil it for our viewers for the next one.
Yes, and of course. I mean, I would understand it as I said, the formation of a military unit like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand also the mistrust of the Brazilians to the Paraguayans in that regard.
Well, I mean, they could just easily become like a fifth column, as it were. And then, when the Brazilians advance forward or the Argentinians advance forward,
yeah, and
the Paraguayans were just like, okay, shoot them in the back.
Yeah, and the Paraguayan Legion after the war, was there were a lot of internal divisions also in between the leaders. I mean, they were political exiles, so you may imagine that some were favoring the most conservative, or some the most liberal, or some the most democratic, or
Yep.
whatever. So it's a really sad chapter of Latin American history, but one worth remembering.
No, no, it is, and I mean there are plenty of conflicts in South America that are worthy of note, and in future episodes we'll be touching on them.
Yeah, and just to we touched the important occurrences of the war: the Mato Grosso campaign, the Corrientes campaign, the siege of Humaitá. But after the sacking of just to uh, conclude how the war ended. After the sacking of Asunción, the 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 Brazilians and Argentinians established a puppet government there and
Mm-hmm.
went to and left a token force to pursue Solano Lopez into the mountains. And they was a guerrilla war that last part of the war until the Battle of Cerro Cora,
Yep.
where
Which Lopez was killed.
yeah, and and his mistress was forced to dig his grave on the
Yeah.
yeah, and I can imagine the Brazilian soldiers. I think she survived the war and went back to Europe after that.
She did, but she also went back rather rich, I would
Ah,
assume.
of course, I can imagine.
You know, Latin American stylists generally flee with as much wealth as you can possess.
Yeah,
Um, it happens all over the place. But I think we did rather well for our first history stream, and I mean the next one will be better because we always look at our other streams and improve them as we go, and we're getting there.
yes. So we are open to suggestions to what you want for us to talk about in our history specials. I hope I hope you enjoyed this, if you want to suggest another topic, not necessarily a war. I mean, we are as history buffs normally. I found that history buffs normally love the history of war.
Yeah, they
So
usually. Oh, sorry. Go on.
if you want us to talk about another thing, like we mentioned some topics like here in this episode, like La Gran Colombia, the process of independence of Latin America, the War of the Pacific, maybe I hope in the future the Falklands War.
Oh, tread carefully, my friend. That's something I don't. I've known so many people who call it Isla de Malvinas, and I just
That's
can't.
Malvinas. It's a complicated topic, and for this, if you remember in the Discord server, um, we got a suggestion to talk about the the Malvinas, the Malvinas from Flipman. Hello,
Yep.
Flipman. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yep.
I think in the future we will actually talk about this, which is an interesting topic because it's the last time a colonial empire went to war for one of his overseas territories.
Yeah, no, it's that's a fascinating war. And it also pretty much ended the dictatorship of Galtieri.
Yeah.
So it had a happy ending to an
I love it.
extent.
Yeah,
But
and sorry, go ahead.
no, yeah, I was just gonna say, but with that though, I think it's been fun. Um, and we will be doing more of these next week. We will resume our regularly scheduled broadcast with probably catching up on this week's fun, because I mean it has been interesting, especially the Kavanaugh situation.
Oh yeah, it's and it's looking worse, in my opinion, worse and worse for the Democrats.
Oh yeah, yeah, but we're not going to spoil that for the good people. We're gonna let them hear about it from us on next week.
Yeah,
So with that, Eduardo, always, man, thank you very much for being honest with me. It's awesome. I always enjoy it.
yeah, it's a great podcast, and thanks.
No problem. Well, good night, everyone.
Good night.